refer your colleagues to it. And so without further ado, I'm Rana Barar. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director for the Community Engagement Program, as well as the Research Action Group for Equity and the Impact Program at UCSF's Clinical and Translational Science Institute. I know many of you on the webinar and would love to warmly welcome those of you I don't know. We're really excited to kind of officially launch this timeline and the resources that we've collected on the Community Engagement Toolkit. This originated as a program, a collaboration between the Center for Community Engagement, with a great deal of gratitude to Wiley Liu and her team at the Center for Community Engagement and the CTSI. And the CTSI team has worked over the past year or so to revamp the design of the website, as well as some of the resources on it, to really provide a depth of resources and tools for doing community engaged research activities. This timeline, as we call it, is really a framework for accessing the tools that are on the toolkit website. It's a way to kind of provide an overview of the community engaged research processes. And on each slide, there are resources linked. There are resources linked on each slide, but there are also additional resources on the website that provide support for many of these phases. I want to note a couple of things before we really get into the content of the toolkit. First of all, while this is laid out linearly, we all know and appreciate that community engagement is not necessarily a linear process. In fact, it's much more cyclical or sort of a two-way street than it is linear. For purposes of sort of laying out the content, we've done it linearly in this timeline model, but we know that that's not really how the work works. But it is, again, a way to kind of access tools at each step of the community engaged research process. So our first slide just welcomes folks in and explains what the timeline is about. Helen, go ahead and go to the next slide. The phases are, as you can see at the bottom, laid out: research design, seeking funding, study implementation, analysis and interpretation, and dissemination. So in the research design section, we have highlighted, I think, a few important ideas. The first being that community engagement takes time. It is about relationship building. It is about building trust. It is about knowing community partners and knowing how to work in those settings. And really, the only way to do that is to spend time. And so that's really what we highlight first. And in many ways, it is a first step into community engaged research. This toolkit, we hope, will serve the needs both of folks who are new or newer to community engaged research, and also for folks who are looking for resources to support work they're already doing. Helen, you can move on to the next slide. We think another, guiding principle for in the research design phase is to start early, and this really goes along with the investing time. If you're halfway through a research project, that's not the time to start building foundational relationships, although we hope that you will find ways in at any phase of the research that you're in. Find ways into community engagement, because there are tools kind of at every phase to allow you to do work that is more community engaged, even if it wasn't something that you started with at the beginning of your project. We have really liked these principles of trustworthiness that are a tool of the AAMC. And so we link them here, and there are a lot of good support tools that go along with the principles. I will turn it over.
I think this one is YouTube, or no, that's probably, sorry. Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone, me again. I'm Helen Orega, and I am a special projects analyst and a navigator here at CTSI. So a little bit about CABs. So everyone is excited about engaging community, which they should be. But we also want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that feels equitable, but in a way that also feels good for community members and community partners and consultants. So there are different ways that we can engage community. I think oftentimes we think creating a community advisory board is the only way, which, you know, it's a great way, but it's not the only way. So community advisory boards or CABs, it's just something to carefully consider. So some other possible approaches to incorporate community voices and to ensure community representation within your team. So while forming a CAB is an excellent means of collaborating with community, it's definitely not the only way, like mentioned previously. So there's some different ways that you can explore different potential avenues to determine like what's the most suitable for you for your project. So things like considering factors such as time commitment, budget constraints, as well as the length of your project and the readiness of the research team to actually deeply engage with community partners. Like Rana mentioned before, we really advocate for folks starting prior to your research project starting, and even like prior to funding. We really want you to establish genuine non-transactional relationships with folks. So some things that you can consider in terms of other ways to engage with community members are community ambassadors, community champions, community conveners, community consultants, clinical research coordinators that you can hire, who you bring on from the community, as well as senior community advisors and community scientists and co-investigators. So some of those are the 7 different ways that we've kind of identified to bring on community partners. So we have 2 case studies that we'll talk about here. One is the Preterm Birth Initiative, which is here at UCSF. They ran their community advisory board for about 7 years, and they really did a great job. Last year, they kind of did a wrap-up event where they did a documentary and launched it at the Oakland Museum. And so we provide some great resources and ways that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can kind of look at lessons learned from the CAB that they've held for 7 years and the things that they've done well and some challenges and things that they would like to do better in the future. So that's one case study. And then the other case study that we're highlighting is a community advisory board that actually highlights and centers youth. And so engaging with youth in research that involves them, like any other CAB, it's really important, but this really amplifies the voices of youth. And so, yeah, we have some resources here where they have a full toolkit that's done very beautifully. And it really outlines and highlights how to engage youth. And so if you'd like to learn more about it, feel free to click on the link here. It brings you to the toolkit. And Cassandra Vega, who's actually on our team as well, but not here today, she is the point person. So if you're looking for more information or a consultation on how to do that, feel free to reach out to her or us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen. My name's Amy Williams, and I am work with the IMPACT program, which stands for Impacting Policy to Accelerate Translation in CTSI. And my pronouns are she and her. So this next part is in the seeking funding category. So when we're thinking about building a budget for community engagement, it is really important to think about and include costs that may be around language interpretation and translation, logistics for focus groups, advisory consultations, making sure that you have sufficient staffing. Is there any costs associated with collaborating a CBO, community-based organization, and making sure that there is support for communities such as childcare at any of the meetings that you are having and transportation for community to and from the event. And then the link can tell you a lot more on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So right there. Thanks, Ellen. This webinar series through the Clinical and Translational Science Institute really provides a step-by-step guide for research to understand the complex process for paying community partners. So it can be very challenging and there are a lot of different steps. So we really suggest that you watch this webinar to learn more about how to process those payments and how to pay your community partners, and also review the community partner payments guide on the bottom.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning. My name is Robert Williams. I am a RAGE navigator and I use he, him pronouns. And now we're going to talk about staff your team appropriately. I think a staffing can make or break a research project. Truly, I do believe that. So you want to plan and budget to recruit a skilled team to effectively support community engagement, especially community advisory boards. Hire staff from diverse backgrounds who will foster relationships, facilitate group decision-making, and create an equitable and welcoming environment for your partners. Our Advancing Excellence in Staff Recruitment program has resources on hiring. Next slide, please. Hire diversely. Prioritize the recruitment of a diverse range of staff and actively involve them as partners in the research process. Diversity brings a wealth of varied perspectives and insights to the research, enriching the quality and depth of the study outcomes. See our clinical research coordinator, Learners for Equity, or our Circle program video on community engagement. I think you'll really enjoy it. Next slide, please. Nurture cultural humility. Implement comprehensive training in cultural humility for all team members. Such training is essential to foster a respectful and inclusive research environment, ensuring that all interactions are conducted with cultural awareness and empathy. And I think there's an interesting YouTube video on cultural humility as a great beginning.
Is Heido here?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Heido Ceballos, and I work in the capacity of a special projects analyst / navigator for our Research Action Group for Equity program and our community engagement program as well. So when we cover the topic of study implementation, I think an important thing that we need to start off with is access to language, right? When we're talking about equitable access to research, we need to consider the importance of language. So providing the necessary resources for individuals that speak a language other than English is fundamental in an inclusive and diverse research environment. To this end, our Research Action Group for Equity program has compiled a variety of resources to leverage access to research for people that speak a language other than English. So in our language access page, you will be able to find best practices on language access, accessible materials, engaging Spanish-speaking populations, and consenting non-English speaking participants, among other things. Additionally, in response to the IRB's new research guidelines to consenting two or more folks that speak a language other than English, we started our language access pilot, which enables us to provide up to $1,500 in translation funds to research teams. So if you or someone you know is in need of support around language translation, we'd like to invite you to visit our toolkit and click on a link to be transferred to our language translation pilot application. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the work centered on equity and anti-racism in research practices. So to be sure that we are centered on equity and anti-racism best practices, we need to have a deep understanding of the demographic composition of the population we are seeking to engage, and to build a foundation that includes tailored resources that resonate with the priority populations. To be able to provide some context of how this came about, in December 2020, the UCSF Task Force on Equity and Anti-Racism in Research was established, and it was charged with assessing existing campus-wide equity and anti-racism activities relevant to research across the institution. So several principles inform this work, including community involvement and transparent community engagement, diverse task force composition, pragmatic and institutional work, and addressing anti-Black racism as a priority. So if you would like to read more and read the complete document highlighting this work, the timeline includes a mini link. And I'd like to include that since we have integrated facilitation and consultation centered on anti-racism through our consultation services. Next slide, please. So talking about consultations, right, which are really our bread and butter when it comes to the work we do in our community engagement, our research action group for equity, and our participant recruitment programs, specifically through our community engagement program. We facilitate consultation for research teams interested in gaining more insight and uplifting the voice of our community partners, but also internal UCSF folks. So we facilitate these consultations between research teams and consultants that align with the needs of the research team to address topics centered on such things as community input for specific strategies, materials, data collection, recruitment strategies, dissemination, among other things. So I'd like to invite you to visit our timeline and explore the community engagement link available to learn more. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roberto Vargas, and I'm Associate Director with Center for Community Engagement and staff with the RAGE and Community Engagement teams here at CTSI. We want to encourage folks to consider the power of partnering with communities to design interventions in ways that are adapted culturally, right? So that includes the nuances of how an audience is communicated to visually, verbally, which methods of communications are used. And so some examples include when we partnered with promotoras and lay health workers and Asian Pacific Islander community, Latinx community, African American Black community in San Francisco. They helped us to shape and deliver messaging around the health harms of sugary drinks by way of culturally adapted design. And that included not just translation of language, but also transcreation of the kind of imagery and the kinds of messaging that resonates with community. Other examples include partnership between CTSI and multiple communities that are underrepresented in research by way of the Digital E-Cohort project, which helped develop a digital platform for engaging people in research. And so that was a partnership that developed at the outset of engagement with folks by way of digital means, how people would get information about research and be invited to participate. And there's a link there for appreciative inquiry tools for how to do more of that. Next slide, please. So this idea of empowering site champions is around identifying specific roles for how partners will relate to one another. And this idea of a site champion is part of a menu of ways that folks can have specific roles for managing communication between research teams. And we have here in this link an example of ways for developing memoranda of understanding. And when folks have sought us out for consultation, we've also shared examples of MOUs that we've developed that outline how communication will happen, what expectations are between teams around data collection, data analysis, et cetera. And it really is helpful for managing relationship, managing expectations, and developing mutual accountability. Next slide, please. And considering community as co-investigators is just one of the ways where we try to dismantle the traditional forms of power dynamics, power relationships between investigator and community merely as participant, right? And so with a community co-investigator, it recognizes the expertise that exists in community and shares power and decision making with community partners by way of this co-investigator relationship. So co-PI university and co-investigator in community. And there is a tremendous resource there at this link developed by the Center of Othering and Belonging. Some really interesting resources there, once again, about dismantling traditional power relationships between researcher and community. So I invite you all to check that out. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruth. I work with the Participant Recruitment Program, and I'm here to talk about how you can go about lowering barriers to participant research here. One of the important things to really highlight is to enhance participation, inclusivity. You really want to adopt strategies that lower the barriers that allow people to meet study teams here at the university and for all other studies. And this could include, different strategies. Do you use EHR recruitment? Do you recruit via social media? Do you recruit in the community? And these are, things that are important for you to think about. You also want to think about maybe expanding your inclusion criteria using technology. Can you offer flexible timing and maybe addressing different abilities within the study team that can really help you enhance your recruitment for your study. And then also wanted to share that, there are plenty of resources that we have available to study teams and researchers here at UCSF at the website link there. So yeah, I'll just go to the next slide. Another important part about enhancing diversity in clinical trial participation is really understanding what your diversity looks like. And I think the best place to start is really in monitoring what your cohort looks like of your enrolled participants. And so it's always best to keep track of this information and really adapt strategies even after you have done recruitment, have initiated recruitment, so that you could really enhance, what you're currently doing. And, what you started off as may not necessarily be the strategy that you continue doing. And it's really important to really monitor the progress, the inclusivity, the diversity of your enrolled participants to really understand what you can do, what can be adjusted. And we've got resources that really help you think about how to make these adjustments. Thank you. Next slide. Hey, and then the next here is really, in creating materials that will support your recruitment that are easily digestible and are very sort of written in plain language. And this is specifically the informed consent. And we want to make sure that people that are enrolling in studies really understand what they're getting into. And, a big thing about that is really developing an informed consent that's written in plain language, very straightforward language, written at least, a max 8th grade reading level. And we want to really, be sure that people understand what they're signing up for, what the study purpose is. And it's always helpful to, develop materials that explain your study that are written with these principles in mind. And there are plenty of resources that are available to study teams here at UCSF. And the link here shared will give you plenty of resources that will be available to you that will, help you provide very plain language informed consents.
And we've talked in many ways about opportunities for working with community partners. There's so much insight that community partners can provide. And as Rana mentioned earlier, it's really important to start early in building that relationship. And yet there are opportunities all along the research continuum, whether it's shaping the research questions, shaping the methods for data collection, partnering in the analysis phase, partnering in identifying opportunities for disseminating the information, and particularly in ways where it gets back to the community who's been studied, or in ways where it can communicate to leaders about policy opportunities for impacting change based on what's been learned. And this link here at the bottom shares a spectrum of involvement. There's light touch involvement to deep partnership and decision making. Certainly, the ideal would be deep partnership, and yet that requires more time and resources. And so by taking a look at that spectrum, you get an understanding of what's realistic for you. Next slide, please. And maintaining relationships is important. So our programs offer opportunities for maintaining those relationships for the entire institution. And so you may have a partnership and you seek opportunity for support from us for that partnership. And then over time, we can find ways of plugging in learners to partner with that organization over time, or connecting them to workforce development opportunities with the anchor institution effort. So important for you to seek ways as much as possible to keep that relationship non-transactional, and we're here to support that. And Aspire was an effort supported by PCORI to identify opportunities for deepening that relationship between university and broader community, as well as to transform how we do research generally. And we invite you to take a look at that link, at those recommendations, which are really powerful, and much of it has been acted upon and implemented. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saji Mansour. I coordinate the SFBA Collaborative Research Network, and I'm gonna, share some of the resources on dissemination. So when we say circle back, it's all about relationships, as my mentioned. But at this stage is really where you determine, if you've had a transactional relationship or if you're building a genuine connection with your partners. You want your partners to be peers during this research process. So respect their time and always report back on project findings. For example, if you have focus groups, make sure you share the findings with them and let the community organizations know what you're going to do with the information you've gathered. We can go to the next slide. So simply publishing is not enough. Your dissemination plan should include media outside of traditional academia. Sending a peer-reviewed article to your community partners isn't enough. As we mentioned, we need to make sure the findings are delivered in a manner that the community can access and is at an appropriate comprehension level. You want to make sure that your research findings can move to action, or can create actionable items for your community partners. So you see in the timeline, we have the Impact Program, which offers consultations on bridging the gap between research and policy. So, I'd encourage you to follow that link and see how you can, have your be. Go to the next slide. Close the loop. So we should always be mindful of community inclusion throughout our projects. Hopefully, by the time you've come to this point, you've already created a plan on how you disseminate your findings. For example, my program, the Collaborative Research Network, we host an annual meeting where we disseminate our yearly activities and garner feedback from the community on where they'd like us to go in the future. And in the gap, one of our previous installments was don't diss dissemination strategies for effective community collaborations. I'd encourage you to follow this link here, and it addresses some common community challenges when it comes to dissemination, and it will help you prepare for the event and not leave your community partners out of your research findings, so they're able to access them and again take action with our findings.
Thank you so much, Saji, and thank you to the whole team. That is our presentation for today. So now we want to open it up for questions, comments. Yeah, we'll let you all have the floor. Stop sharing for a second. Do we have any questions or comments? I don't know if things have been answered in the chat already, but we really hope that you enjoyed the presentation. We hope that this was informative and that you're able to use some of the resources that were displayed and talked about today in either research projects that you currently have going on or things that you're looking forward to working on, and maybe learning how to connect with community partners or learning different ways to connect with them other than just CABs, like we mentioned, and how to maintain the relationships, and also kind of closing the loop and finding creative ways to disseminate information.
Helen, we have one question in the Q&A.
Okay. I don't
Can you
know.
talk more about the support for non-manuscript dissemination efforts? Roberto, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, thanks. So recently we had a partnership with folks from multiple communities across San Francisco. It began in the pandemic. It was called Stop COVID. It began particularly with an interest in understanding what barriers, what concerns, what questions existed in communities of color around vaccines. This was prior to access to vaccines. And what we decided in partnership with community, that what was most important was for us to develop practice briefs for local health department leadership and leaders in community who had the capacity and willingness to lead vaccine dissemination efforts. And so it included things, for example, like assuring that folks with language capacity for each community was available, making sure that sites were walkable from communities where there was disproportionate impact of COVID infection, et cetera. So, we could have published, and actually some of this was published for academic journals, but what the community and we agreed that it was really important to get this information into the hands of local health department leaders and others who could really help shape change for how vaccines were disseminated in community. And I can actually, at the Rafiki Coalition website, and I'll try to find a link and drop it in the chat, the policy briefs are there, and there are several. And that's just one example. Other examples include developing one-page infographics to share with folks ideas about sugary drinks policy. But that was also developed between researchers and community folks to inform policymakers about which sugary drinks policies communities were in support of based on community-based participatory research on that subject. And we did similar with alcohol retail policy.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Amy, do you want to add something about resources that are available to support dissemination of non-manuscript items?
Yes, definitely. So with the Impact program, we offer a grant supplement, and we call it the Last Mile Grant Supplement. And the funding is specifically for dissemination efforts, whether it will be you need someone to help you create that infographic, or you want help creating, you need money to help do the policy brief, or go meet with strategic partners or community partners. And the application is actually open right now, which is very exciting. So I'll put the link in the chat where you can learn more about the Last Mile Grant Supplement. And also on the website, there's a link to tell you about past awardees and the types of projects they've done, including some of their materials, so that you can get a great idea of what you could do.
Thanks so much, Amy. That's a really great resource. And those supplements are offered in both RAP cycles. So as Amy noted, the deadline for this current cycle, I think, is at the end of September. And then the deadline for the spring cycle is usually in February.
Like mid-February-ish.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
listed yet, but usually it starts end of January to mid-February. It usually takes about 4 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So we had another question from Jessica about how the resources were identified and how these best practices were created. I can give a little bit of information and then turn it over to Helen, who's really spearheaded this project. The best practices themselves, this list of the headlines in the timeline, were developed by the Research Action Group for Equity Steering Committee, which is a group that consists of faculty, staff, and community partners that it supports it's coordinated by Jairo Ceballos and was until just recently co-coordinated by Tung Nguyen, who is now the Associate Vice Chancellor for Clinical Research for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism in UCSF's Office of Research. So that group created the best practices. Helen, do you want to talk a little bit about the resources that are linked?
Sure. Yeah, so some of the resources that are linked, so I would definitely say that some of them were co-created by community. So for example, some of the CAB resources from PTBI, as well as the YRAC. So those were findings that came out of those specific CABs. And those materials were developed by the CAB and the PIs. And so other things that we've taken were like different toolkits that other universities have produced with their communities. I would say some of them are resources that different institutions have created. So maybe inspired by community members or their time working with community. But I would say for the most part, most of the resources that we highlighted today are kind of either co-developed, co-created, or inspired by community. We have about 8 minutes. Do we have any other questions or comments?
I just want to add that, we are in terms of the resources, we're constantly learning about new resources. Gather the Othering and Belonging Institute's resources for community partners about partnership is something that came across our desk just a couple of months ago. So if you have tools that you love, that you think are really excellent tools to guide different parts of the research process and to guide or to provide insight, please send them our way. This is not a static, a static thing. We want it to be a useful, growing repository for resources that are excellent, and we know that folks continue to evolve these principles and evolve techniques and strategies to do better, more inclusive research. And so we welcome suggestions. We welcome suggestions of things to include. We want this to be something that continues to grow and evolve as our, knowledge and understanding and wisdom grows and evolves.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Rana. And again, these are just tools. We know that everyone is doing really amazing work. So again, like Rana said, if you have a toolkit that you've created, or if you have a method that you've been using to work with community partners or community researchers, feel free to lend those resources to us. We would definitely love to add them to our toolkit. We hope that these resources that we provided today and presented on today were useful, and hopefully you all can take this back. And I think there was a question, I know Roberto answered this in terms of dissemination. I think sometimes dissemination can feel like really larger than life, and sometimes budget is not available. So just kind of think of creative ways in which maybe you don't have to always use money. So you could host a kind of like community forum, whether it's in person or just on like a Zoom platform. I think the main point is to kind of just disseminate what you've done or what you've collaborated with your community partners. Even if it's, just like a small presentation, even if you are creating a manuscript, make sure that your community partners are a part of that. So it doesn't always have to be grand, but just think about community in terms of think about always involving community in every aspect of the way.